is Dina, and I'm a professor of comparative education at the University of Birmingham. And I'm also leading the research program Disability Under Siege with many of my partners here today from Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. This is a program working to develop networks to address the issue that most children with disabilities don't go to school in the region. And also we are a group, and several people today will be speaking on the second project, Deinstitutionalisation Under Siege, which is looking at the experiences in Lebanon and Palestine of people who are institutionalized, disabled people who are institutionalized, and those experiences, which we will hear about. The webinar is being recorded. There's British Sign Language and Arabic Sign Language interpretation, and live captions are also being provided. The British Sign Language and Arabic Sign Language interpreters are spotlighted, and their live captioning is also provided by clicking on the closed captioning box at the bottom of the screen. Presenters and moderators will use their cameras once they're presenting, and the question and answers will be done after the speakers complete their presentations. Unfortunately, the team from Gaza are unable to join us, but other members from West Bank and Lebanon will be able to talk on the deinstitutionalization project, and this event is an enabling space for us to present on the culminating findings that we've found coming out of this work. So let me introduce my friends and colleagues here. So we have Dr. Maha Shaib, who's the director of the Center for Lebanese Studies, who will be our facilitator and moderator for the session. We will be showing a short video about a testimony sent by Shireen, who is a journalist and disability activist from the Gaza Strip. And then Suzanne Mtweli will be our first speaker. Suzanne is an academic researcher at the Institute of Community and Public Health at Birzeit University, and her main research expertise is mental health and disability. She's worked for many years on disability intervention research and currently focuses on participatory action research. She will also introduce Shafa Abu Sroor, who is a researcher, also linked to Birzeit University, and a disability activist. Our second speaker is Professor Jasbir Puar, who is a professor and graduate director of Women and Gender Studies at Rutgers University and visiting University of British Columbia. And she's the author of the amazing and well-known book, The Right to Maim, Debility, Capacity and Disability. Our third speaker is Dr. Attab Shaib, who's an academic and senior researcher in inclusive design and disability specialist at the Center of Lebanese Studies. And she's currently visiting at the Engineering Department Inclusive Design Group at the University of Cambridge. So welcome everybody, and welcome to the audience. I'll now hand over to Maha.
Thank you, Dina. It's a pleasure to be having it's sad to be having this conversation, but it's great to have all of you here together. And this event we're organizing with Birmingham University, but also and Center for Lebanese Studies, as well as the Real Center and CaNDER at University of Cambridge. And it's and I think what we're trying to do now, which I think, Jasper, you started a few years ago by bringing back politics into disability. Disability in general has been highly and largely depoliticized, and we often talk about it either in medical or social terms, but we rarely talk about it as a political, as Jasper, you argue in your book, as the maiming of Palestinians as a strategy to disable a community. I want to also mention that many of our colleagues from Gaza University haven't been able to be with us for safety concerns. You probably are aware that over 100 academics have been assassinated and killed by the Israeli army. And as a result, they didn't feel safe to be with us today. However, we will try to share some of their ideas through these presentations. So I hope today we can raise the profile of disability. We know now Palestine has the largest and the highest percentage of amputations in the world in any society. This is a major a challenge that the Palestinian society will have to overcome. At the same time, there are prevailing attitudes and the negative attitudes associated with disability. So the challenge socially, physically, medically, and politically is a huge. And I think one of the themes that we will try to highlight is the role of the disability movement and the role of scholarship in this field. Us as scholars in the field of disability, how can we in our research do our research differently in order to show all of these manifestations of the politics of maiming, of disabling, but also how we can address some of the challenges that these individuals will have. I'm not going to take too much time. I hope we will be able to have a good discussion at the end. For those who need interpretation, you can press the interpretation button. We will move now first to a video by Shireen, an activist with disability in Gaza, sharing her experience. There's an issue with the voice.
كنا عايشين بأكبر سجن في العالم. أما خلال العدوان الإسرائيلي الأخير على قطاع بلش بتبع أكتوبر 2023 كان مليان الخوف والرعب كان يشعر لو كنت حواليك لأنك حواليك لو كنت ببري عقل ظروف الشيء بعد العدوان الكبير على قطاع العدوان اللي بلش من قبل استمر بنحكي على الأوضاع حابين كل الناس تسمع.
Okay, unfortunately, we have a technical problem with the sound system, but Shireen wanted to, which I apologize for. Shireen have really tried hard to share some of the experiences that persons with disabilities are experiencing at the moment. Imagine having to flee and to survive war when you have a disability, when you don't have medical care, and you're living in a place where all the infrastructure has been damaged and destroyed. We will share and make this video available on the website of the Center for Lebanese Studies, so you could see that. And unfortunately, Shireen couldn't be with us today because of the connectivity issues, as well as the threat on her life, as many activists don't feel safe at the moment. So we will move to the next speaker, Suzanne and Shaza, who were involved in doing a study on deinstitutionalization, yet, as we mentioned, we couldn't continue business as usual, as if there's no war. So I think so Suzanne and Shaza will share what does it mean now to talk about deinstitutionalization when all institutions have been damaged and destroyed. Over to you, Suzanne and Shaza.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, we worked on the deinstitutionalization study that consists of 3 parts. The first part was a literature review about deinstitutionalization globally and locally. And also we conducted some visits to residential institutions to know more about their services, what they think of institutionalization and deinstitutionalization. And thirdly, the pilot project that Shada Abu Sroor worked on and is going to present today. So her study focuses on the experiences of people with disabilities who lived or are currently living in residential institutions in the West Bank, on what institutionalization means to them and how they perceive deinstitutionalization. Shada is an academic researcher and she works with us on this project, and she is a disability activist. She will briefly present about the deinstitutionalization pilot project, and then focus on the current situation of people with disabilities in the West Bank under occupation and war. So the floor is yours now, Shada. Is Shada with us?
Shada lost connection, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah, I suggest we move then until Shaza's back. Shall we move to Jasper? Over to you, and then we can come back to Shaza once she manages to connect from Ramallah. Jasper, you're muted.
My apologies. Thank you so much for inviting me to join today for this really important conversation. I want to thank Maha and Itab for the invitation, and also for organizing the logistics, and also just to mark what a difficult context this is, what a you know, incredible moment it is to have footage from Gaza right now talking about you know, what it means to be disabled in Gaza at this moment. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for that effort, as flawed as it might be technologically. These are the images that we have. These are the technological vehicles we have at the moment. I wanted to open with a recap of a roundtable that I hosted at the University of Chicago in the spring of 2022, called Disability Under Siege, Palestine. And it featured several of the speakers who are here today with us, Professor Dina Kawan, and also Shata Abu Sarur, but also reconstructive surgeon Ghassan Abu Sitta, who you've likely seen on television and Twitter once he returned from Gaza, and Yasmin Sununu, who's a professor and researcher who specializes in disability in educational realms in Palestine. And then also Professor Nader Shilab Kevorkian, who joined the discussion. I wanted to review some of the general takeaways from that conversation, particularly as they are very relevant to what we were talking about today. So Dina started us off by talking about how it's how it's predicted that by 2050 there'll be up to 25% of the world's population will be disabled, and she talks about how that's exacerbated by conflict, crisis, poverty, global climate change. And Dina notes that this is significant not only in servicing that sector of the population, but how it fundamentally changes how we understand what it means to be a human being and to be a citizen in the world. And I would say one of the things that the kind of global audience is witnessing today in the context of the genocide on Gaza is this kind of fundamental change in what it means to televisually participate in a mass impairment, in the witnessing of mass impairment, and what it means to understand disability and disablement on a mass scale. Dina also notes that much of the research on disability has been conducted in the global north, even though most people with disabilities are in the global south. There's a kind of often reported 80% of disabled people are in the global south, which means, of course, that this expansion of disabled populations to 25% will disproportionately happen in the global south. And again, this statistic of 80% of disabled people being in the global south is kind of radically, I think, re-altered when we're looking at the mass impairment that's happening in Gaza right now. Dina queries what are the boundaries of disability and how does one even operationalize disability in the Palestinian context where there's so much violence and there's such a dearth of human rights for everybody. And she brings up the example of mental health, which I think we're going to be able to hear more about, whereby much of the population is or will be traumatized. So disability is something that's not static. It's ongoing, it's continuous, it's changing. Some of this work is related to the really important work of Rita Giacomin, who's been writing about disability and the history of disability rights organizing and activism in Palestine for some 20 plus years now. And then Dina also flags the dangers of hierarchying disability, especially in a place where disabilities arising from war and occupation are not only not as stigmatized, they may also be considered heroic. And so we have intellectual disabilities are more likely to be stigmatized. And of course, we can talk about how the political capital of heroicism is always related to the utility of that heroic narrative to the kind of politics at hand. So once the war is over, you may not necessarily be a hero, and nevertheless, these are well-known hierarchies that exist across disabilities. Ghassan Abu Sitta discussed with us the injuries from the Great March of Return, which happened during March 30th, 2018 to December 27th, 2019. Some 33,000 Palestinians in Gaza were injured. 8,000 of them were shot by sniper bullets. 90% of these were in the lower limbs. And so Ghassan argues that the Great March is a critical juncture, not only in Palestinian history, but actually in colonial history as the largest mass act of mass disabling. And I'm going to come back to the Great March in a moment. But Ghassan also draws our attention to the lifespan of the wound, as it were, from the moment of sniper injury to multiple surgeries, anywhere from 10 to 20 that are necessary to repair injured limbs, to address bone loss, to address the shortening of limbs that affect ability to walk, to address the destruction of knee joints. And so he calls this whole lifespan a kind of locking of bodies into a cycle of disfigurement and pain. Yasmin Sununu lays out what she calls the triple matrix of maiming, and that triple matrix is a combination of three things that composes the structural system that works to attempt to oppress or suppress Palestinian resistance. The first being intentional maiming, which I'll talk about in a moment. The second is a kind of continuous targeting of infrastructure, as well as the de-development of infrastructure, especially in Gaza, as we've seen over the years of the siege. And then the third element of that being apartheid practices, the restriction of movement and mobility, the inaccessible environment, and the inaccessibility of medical care. Shada raised the point that it's difficult to make distinctions between activism that is bound by persons with disabilities from other social and political activists. So the occupation is the main reason for so many crises experienced by Palestinians as a whole, be they with disabilities or without disabilities. And so the point here being that everybody is targeted. And then Shata also made this really important observation that habilitation and rehabilitation services were much better before 2006 to 2008, when international agencies started promoting the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. So what I understood Shata to be saying is that there was a shift in understanding of the experiences of people with disabilities in Palestine, and the translation of rights frameworks into policies actually led to what she called a deterioration in service delivery. And Shada also raised the issue of political prisoners in Israeli jails experiencing medical neglect, which is a huge topic that I think is under acknowledged in some ways. Nadra wanted us to connect temporality to disability, and she brought up what she called the contours of violating the time of childhood as part of our analysis of disability. So this is what she describes as unchilding, which is now a kind of familiar framework for all of us. And she defines unchilding as exposing the political work of violence that is designed to create, to direct, to govern, to transform, and construct colonized children as dangerous. And so, of course, we're seeing this happen right now in terms of the way in which children have been targeted in the genocide on Gaza, and the emergence of what has been called the largest cohort of pediatric amputees in history. Nadra also wanted us to focus on the agency of the disabled. And so she highlighted a group of amputees playing football. And she also wanted to think about finding ways to challenge what she called the gun-to-body politics of the state. So where do we locate the ability to disrupt such disabling power? So in the last part of this, I'll just turn a little bit to the work I've done on the history of maiming in Palestine. And what I mean by maiming is the targeting to injure as a strategy that claims to preserve life, but ultimately acts in the service of genocide. And that is to say, it acts as a particular, through the mechanism of humanitarian rhetoric, as some kind of gift or favor, but ultimately injuring instead of killing actually contributes to the genocide in a very specific way. And I wanted to flag again the 2018 Great March of Return, which I am increasingly understanding as a kind of grim rehearsal for this current iteration of genocide. The history of maiming of Palestinian bodies can have many beginnings. We can talk about the Nakba, we can talk about the 1967 occupation, we can talk about what happens during the first Intifada, when then Defense Ministers Yitzhak Rabin's kind of instituted the infamous break their bones policy. Rabin was responding to international concerns about the high death toll and instituted this policy to punish Palestinian protesters. He hoped to avoid international criticism for mass killing, but all the while he was able to claim this humanitarian stance towards Palestinians. So the reports of the numbers of Palestinians killed during the 6 wars of the First Intifada range from 1,100 to 2,000 Palestinians, but the number of injuries were anywhere from up to 120,000, with up to 60,000 of these being in Gaza, and at least 25,000 of these being children. 4 military offensives on the Gaza Strip since 2006. So we had 2006, 2008 through 9, 2012, 2014, have left at least 17,000 Gazan Palestinians injured. And we see during the 2014 Gaza war that there's a kind of spectacle of more than 2,000 civilian deaths were the numbers that people were paying attention to, while over 10,000 injuries were seemingly unremarkable. And so these are cases where maiming has a tactical value as a way of keeping the death tolls low or to create more destruction without attracting attention, or both, while constituting injury as something that's incidental or accidental and not deliberate. So you can see how maiming in these cases wind up being cloaked for the global audience as a humanitarian practice, right? I think with the Great March of Return, we see a shift. Gaza becomes this kind of theater of explicit maiming. It's no longer accidental or incidental, but intentional in its scale and intensity. Sniping is an act of precision without any pretense of the accidental or of this liberal conviction that maiming is an inescapable and unavoidable consequence of war. This theater was witnessed and sanctioned by global audiences, and I think this sanctioning is really important because here's where the international community, such as it is, was tutored, and visually so, in the differential value between Israeli and Palestinian life, and were then able to internalize Palestinian bodies as inherently damaged. So during the Great March of Return, mass media routinely had images of rows of Palestinian men with amputated legs, in wheelchairs, bandaged, and on crutches. And these images had an undeniable ideological impact, and I think, again, is a kind of precursor or testing ground for the acceptance and the absorption of the kind of images that we are seeing today. And I think, and I could talk a little bit about this later, but Maha mentioned this, and I'm trying to wrap up here. Maha mentioned that, you know, Palestine has the largest and highest amputations in the world, such that you know, the amputation has now been called a health crisis in Gaza. But there's also a way in which Israel is trying to produce, I would say, amputation as a kind of signature injury of Palestinians. And so I wanted to, and there's much to say about that, but I just wanted to wrap up by saying how important it is that we understand that hundreds of thousands, if not 2 million Palestinians are going to survive this genocide, injured, maimed, debilitated people who carry the literal inscriptions of genocide on and in their bodies now and through future generations, and are going to be teaching us what it means to survive through such impairment, and to live and to ultimately thrive through such impairment. And so we have these images of amputees and also of Gazans collecting dispersed body parts of loved ones, of putting together what has been dismembered, what Nadra Shalab-Kevorkian has called necrophrenology. But what she also notes is the determination to insist on bringing the parts back together, to insist on being differently whole. Nadra has been speaking so powerfully to the gathering of dismemberment, or to, you know, the process of literal rememberment. And so even though amputation functions as an attempt by the colonized state to mark its power, there's also so many refusals on the part of Palestinians to concede that power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jasper. This was wonderful. So many things that I hope you will pick up on. We will move to our next speaker, Shaza. While this is being done, I just want to anchor, Jasper, some of the, at the moment we're doing also a study as part of the Disability Under Siege on social movement amongst the disability community. And it's and I think probably the way we look at disability is because of the scholarship that has been produced, which is highly apolitical, but also sheds the light on a certain angle that is quite a narrow and biased angle that's focusing on disability rather than on the wholeness, as you were saying. So, for instance, in Lebanon, the disability movement has been, during the Civil War, has been a unique movement in the sense of it was before even we spoke about intersectionality, they were actually addressing different rights, not only disability or the rights of persons with disabilities, but the rights of many other groups, having a very politicized agenda. Something that unfortunately over time has become more and more depoliticized. So there's a lot to say about the scholarship, what the scholarship that exists now hides about disability and persons with disabilities and how they engage with that experience, but also how they thrive in the society. So we'll hopefully pick up this the issue of scholarship and what kind of, and the disability research that exists, but also why we don't see more research being conducted in terms from a politicized and political angle and a social angle. Shaza, I hope Shaza's with us now, so we can move to, no, maybe still having connection issues. Shall we move then to Aitab? Over to you.
Hi, I think Shaza is with us. Shaza is with us. She just needs to be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Over to you, Shaza. We're ready.
Yes, thank you so much for having me with you this webinar. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about research, the research we were conducting on institutionalization. And it was a chance for us, it's a pilot project. It was a chance for us to maybe take some notes on how persons with disability document those experiences, be them now in institutions or be them were in institutions before, why they are there, if and how they were included or involved in the decision making to be in those institutions, what are the factors in their environment that kind of kick them to be in those residential institutions, the treatment they receive in those institutions by the staff members, be them the educators, or let's say housekeepers, if I can use this term, and you know, how they communicate with the staff, how the staff treats them, the services they are provided in those institutions, non-academic activities that those institutions do or do not do to be it perpetuate exclusion or enforce inclusion for persons with disability. And also we tried to understand what they think of non-residential institutions or deinstitutionalization, how they think of it, how do they think it may work, and if they think it may work or not. All those, like, they were the kind of questions we tried to explore with 9 persons with disability. Some of them are still in residential institutions. We can't say that, you know, the findings we gathered are to be generalized in any way, but some of what we found so far speaks to the fact that persons with disability are not necessarily always involved in making the decisions to be in those institutions. It's usually their parents who make those decisions without involving them, taking into account disability and age specific measures to involve them in this process of making those decisions. For several people, it was obvious that you know, the treatment they receive in those institutions is really I would use the term inhumane. We assessed a lot of violence practices by the staff members, be them teachers or housekeepers. We also assessed that people, regardless of those conditions, cannot say that they don't like those institutions, or there's this kind of, it's like a confusion, because in this environment they find friends who they can communicate with, especially people who have hearing difficulties, and this communication is very important for them, and they lack it at their homes. And also other people who have other types of difficulties or disabilities will also shed light on the community it is formed in those institutions, and how sometimes it makes it hard to make the decision to leave, even though it's really hard for them to be exposed to all forms of violence they shared with us. So yes, there is confusion that does need further exploration on our parts as people who are interested in knowledge production in this aspect. And we also noticed the confusion when maybe six out of 9 said that they don't want they want non-residential institutions, but there's something to be explored further, which is the difference between non-residential institutions and inclusive institutions, because it's kind of interesting to also notice that this was something that was confusing for them. So are we talking about disability organizations but not residential, or are we talking about inclusive educational institutions that are open and available for everybody? So this was kind of confusing. Now, I will stop here about this research. And as you know, I mean, Palestine is going through very dramatic situation. This war has been taking place for 8 years. Gaza has been experiencing what many people refer to as genocidal war. And the West Bank as well is experiencing so many policies and practices, and has been experiencing those policies and practices by the Israeli occupation for more than 75 years. And when we talk about the West Bank, we talk about the expansion of settlements, military operations and attacks in so many areas in the West Bank, displacement of so many communities, checkpoints, roads that have been closed, and all of this, affect all Palestinians, and maybe come with, not maybe, for sure, come with more burdens when we add disability as an experience to those circumstances. I did talk with some of the representatives of disability organizations or organizations who work with and for persons with disability to prepare for that. And they mentioned the fact that many areas has been closed was a reason why many persons with disability could not make it to the rehabilitative and educational institutions where they have to go on a daily basis, or they used to go on a daily basis. So this has not been possible for them since the 7th or 8th of October 2023. We also noticed the fact that many Palestinians had lost their jobs, including Palestinians with disability or their family members. This, of course, comes with really challenging and difficult socioeconomic situation where persons with disability as well as their family members are lacking access to the basic needs, just like in some way in Gaza, like food. Many families cannot have access to food because they lost their jobs. And of course, when we talk about disability as a factor, we also assessed that they couldn't make many needs available for persons with disability. Some persons with disability left their jobs because of whatever positions they have on work that did not work with the organizations where they work. The other thing that has been happening for a long time and did increase during the last 8 months is the displacement of so many communities, specifically Bedouin communities. Unfortunately, organizations that work with and for persons with disability don't have disability disaggregated data on how this has been and is affecting persons with disability, the displacement. We also, I mean, the West Bank also, especially some areas in the north, like Jenin Camp, Karim, Masafer Yatta, They have been also experiencing military operations and attacks, which also, I mean, affects all Palestinians in those communities, but more Palestinians with disability because they can't evacuate quickly. Those attacks by the Israelis also target the infrastructure of those areas and make it hard for persons with disability to leave their homes or move from a place to another. And of course, it comes also with a lot of fear for so many people, including persons with disability. Just today, a friend of mine in Tulkarem sent me some messages telling me that the Israeli soldiers entered their house and broke everything, destroyed everything in the house, and how this has been a scary experience for her, I believe, and for all her family members. Of course, we as persons with disability in the West Bank, we also experience this feeling of helplessness when we listen and know and feel what is happening with persons with disability in Gaza, with so many few things that can be done in terms of activism. I really don't have words to express how this as a feeling affects us as activists, as human beings. And given that, you know, people from Gaza couldn't join, I hope you will allow me just to shed light on some issues our friends in Gaza carry as messages. May I?
Yes.
Okay. So I will stick to the most important things. I mean, they keep saying that everything in Gaza has been killed, life has been killed. They use this term, life has been killed. They also talk about the fact that many persons with disability don't have enough time to evacuate. They don't have access to information, especially people with hearing difficulties and people with learning or intellectual difficulties. They can't access information, and this results in them resulted in many of them being killed. Displacement is a huge problem. The evacuation is a huge problem, especially when we talk about the rebel. And the fact that, you know, the tents isn't a place where any human being like to live in, unless people are camping. But for persons with disability, it's yet way more hard. They talk about the fact that they can't access, you know, rehabilitative and medical services. The fact that many goods are not allowed entry to Gaza, including assistive devices like wheelchair, crutches, and many kinds of medicine. And they also bring the issue of political prisoners with disability. One of them was arrested. His name is Izzuddin Banna. He was arrested. He has a physical disability and was arrested during this war. And under the torture, we lost him. He was, I would say, killed. And of course, many other persons with disability are in prison, just like many other Palestinians. I mean, almost 10,000 Palestinians since the beginning of this war has been arrested. Some of them are persons with disability, and we have to really remember that everybody who is leaving, who is being released, is saying that the prisons those days are nothing like we've known before in terms of torture, the deprivation of food, electricity, water, medical treatment, and for persons with disability, I believe we will be talking about assistive devices, accessible environment, and so forth. Yes.
You here, but if you can wrap up because the time is.
And yes, I already finished. Thank you so much for having me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but thank you very much. Hopefully we'll be able to all come together in a discussion around all these very important issues. Aitab, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I will be talking about now the answers, how we can think inclusively in addressing disability in Palestine. So we know that according to the UNCRPD, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, in its paragraph U, Article 11 and Article 25, it ensures the protection and safety of persons with disabilities in conflict and in war zones. However, like any other UN convention law, it has been violated by the Israeli army, and none of the UN conventions have been taken into consideration or respected. And I will share a story from a quote from Nahil. She is a disability activist currently living in Gaza. She's a wheelchair user. So she says, throughout this war, people with disabilities have been forced to flee to multiple locations. Why wasn't there a dedicated organization to ensure their safe displacement? Their safety should have been a priority. This is the hardest war, not just for us, but for all society, yet people with disabilities have suffered as much. So we can see how the situation is such a dire situation. And I will be sharing a little bit of statistics from the Relief Web here, talking about, this dates back to 20 May, when people were more displaced. So most of the Gaza population, they have been displaced several times. So here, 85% of the population, they have been displaced multiple times, maybe 6, 7, 8 times. And you can imagine each time they have to leave all of their things, their tents and everything, and move to another place. And yet people with disabilities will definitely have a more difficulty in such kind of displacement. Nearly 40% have been displaced over the last 2 weeks, many of whom they have been displaced multiple times. Also, we don't have an accurate statistics yet, but there is an expected number of 71,000 persons have been injured, and 5,000 of them, they acquired disabilities. And I will talk about here, share some data from a colleague who shared this from Atfaluna Society for Deaf. And he's done a survey between January and February 2024 of 1,600 people with and without disabilities in Gaza. 74% of them say that the official emergency guidelines is not inclusive and difficult to apply. 82% stated that all instructions during risk crisis they don't have interpretations for sign language interpretations. 65% of persons with disabilities and 75% of emergency service providers are not trained on safe evacuation and self-protection during emergency. 100% of people with disabilities that they noted that the physical infrastructure, the displacement, the shelters are inaccessible. There is lack of accessibility at refugee areas, toilet facilities, and assistive devices. 85% they lacked medical interventions and difficulties in receiving medical needs. And with the people who've shared their stories, many of them, they have chronic diseases in addition to their disabilities. And many of them need kidney dialysis, they need dialysis, they need, some of them are cancer patients, they need to have that treatment, and yet they cannot access all of that. 83% lost their assistive devices. 98% of women and girls reported encountering complex challenges in getting their dignity needs, such as hygiene, sanitary pads, etc. 92% reported that toilets, they don't meet their privacy standards. Particularly, we're talking about people with visual impairments and wheelchair users who need somebody to, or with physical disability, they need somebody to accompany them. And definitely they have issues with their privacy. 95% of children with and without disabilities reported facing shortages in medical support. 97% of those children are in continuous crying and have panic attacks. 80% of those children, they face difficulties expressing their feelings, and 80% they face a shortage of diapers. And here we're talking about children with disabilities. If I go to the statistics related to the infrastructure, so we have 313 schools that they are partially demolished. Schools and universities completely demolished, 107. 88 hospitals and health centers, they are out of service. 206 heritage buildings, they are destructed. 189 government buildings completely demolished. And here, if I talk about the institutions that we're talking about, we were working, the team in Lebanon, the team in Palestine, West Bank, and Gaza, we were working on how we can advocate for the Article 19 of the deinstitutionalization of people with disabilities. And to my understanding, that there were 6 institutions in Gaza which they provided services for people with disabilities, and we know that many of those, we don't have accurate number of how many institutions they were demolished. However, so those institutions, they are demolished. People with disabilities, they are scattered everywhere and they don't have any kind of services. So yes, we moved towards deinstitutionalization, but in what sense? We moved where we don't have any service for people with disabilities. People with disabilities are not in institutions, they're not getting their services, and they don't have inclusive services while they are displaced. 3 churches were destroyed, 604 mosques, they were completely demolished, and 160 health institutions, they are partially demolished. So now, talking about the amputations, and Jasper and Shada talked about that. So we have the highest number of people with who acquired amputations, became having amputations. And in Gaza, there were 2 centers. The Sheikh Hamad Hospital, it was established in 216. It's severely damaged in the early stages of war, and definitely there is no way of providing prosthetics at the moment. The same applies to the artificial limbs and polio, which is currently inaccessible for staff and patients. And that means that the people who have amputations, there is no way of, holding them. There is no way of moving. So they need to be carried and be dependent on others. So what should we do at the current situation? So there should be an inclusive humanitarian response taken into place in case of emergency. So a priority should be given to shelters to make them accessible and have portable accessible toilets. Provisions of assistive devices and access to health support and medication, provision of food, security, clean water, hygiene kits, provision of basic needs for children, such as milk, diapers, clothes, blankets, and provisions of psychosocial interventions. So these should be done immediately at the moment to provide those services until there is a cease of fire or stop of war. And what should we do in post-war? And hopefully this will come soon. So we should have a holistic approach of an inclusive approach for recovery intervention. And this should be applied on all of the services. So, and to define, what do we mean by inclusive approach? So we should think of people with different age group, not only people with disabilities, but the whole population with different age groups based on their particular needs, gender diversity, left and right-handed, body diversity, people with ethnic backgrounds, families, and different disability groups. So not only wheelchair users, we should think of the whole spectrum of disabilities and people with different diets as well. And how to move towards that, we should change attitudes and perception about disability. So we should move from the medical approach, which highlights the issue on the person, and move towards the infrastructure, the services which limit, and the built environment which limit people from accessing these services. And then nothing about us without us. So this should be rule number one: participatory approach and consultation with diverse people. Include people with disabilities and specialized disability organizations as stakeholders in developing, implementing, and monitoring emergency preparedness. And also now we're talking about reconstruction of Gaza, so those people should be included in every step to ensure that their needs are anticipated for. Identify potential partners to establish inclusive guidelines and accessibility standards, covering all provisions from transportation to evacuation. So we study the whole cycle, cycle that the person uses, and to ensure that all of the services are fully catered for. And I'm sure many of the people who are attending, they are experts in many fields in inclusion and all of that. And we can collaborate. Whoever is interested to collaborate, please contact us, and then probably we can work together later on providing those guidelines. Collaborate to improve data quality and collection tools addressing disability needs. So, and we noticed that there is lack of data, so there should be provision of that data, and this data should be accessible for everyone. Mandating inclusive inclusive design and accessibility guidance in reconstruction to include the accessibility and inclusive design in Gaza reconstruction policies. And we're talking about all types of buildings. We need to rebuild all Gaza, so we need to build hospitals, schools, universities, residential areas, public spaces, and also the communication should be all, and information should be all inclusive. Training and capacity building, this is really important. So facilitate cross-sector learning and capacity building for all sectors, in particular healthcare, education, mental health support, physical therapy, prosthetic supplies, occupational therapy, etc. So all of those teams, they should be trained, and who provide this training are people with disabilities themselves, in addition to experts in the field of inclusion, to ensure that their needs are anticipated for. Developing academic program, research, and awareness campaigns, centering, and this can be achieved by centering the voices of experts in local organizations in Gaza and in Palestine in overall, disability NGOs, educational programs, and partnerships to teach and adopt inclusion across disciplines. And now that we know that going to education, it will take time in Gaza, so there should be partners with other universities to ensure that all of the curriculums in different disciplines teach about inclusion. Conduct research on the benefits of adopting inclusive approaches. Launch media awareness campaigns of inclusive emergency once an emergency plan is set for, and this should be available to public and private sector. And I will end up by Shireen, whom we started the webinar with. So Shireen, as an activist, she lost her vision during 2002, I think, during one attack in Gaza. And she says, when I lost my sight, it shattered my world and took me years to piece myself back together. But now the agony is even greater as I witness my city being ripped away from me. My people, the trees, the cherished memories, and our dreams. What terrifies me most about this world is not death itself, but the horror of losing one or more of my limbs, leaving me with a double disability, or the unbearable fear of losing my beloved family, leaving me in unbearable solitude. As we endure this merciless war, my one desperate wish is to be alive, just to stay alive. And we can see here the power of the message of being alive, that people with disabilities, like people without disabilities in Gaza, they have the right to live, they have to enjoy the services like any other people in the whole world. I will end up my presentation with this photo, which showed a lady She's the young lady wearing a scarf, having eyeglasses. She's holding a big black bag. She's walking, and behind her there is rubber. And we can see nice illustrations that present the education. We have the globe, we have the calculator, and there is written word in Arabic. It says madrasa ala tariq, which means a school on the street. And she has another slogan that says, "Be the light for all to see." And this is what we believe Palestinians in whole Palestine. They are resilient at the moment, and with this resilience that they want to be the light for all to see, they will be able to rebuild Gaza inclusively. Thank you.
Thank you, Aitab. I think we can all now come together. If you can stop, please, the share screen. Okay, I think if all the other participants, the speakers, okay, so thank you very much for shedding the light on so many levels of this topic. And one of the things that we try to do in this session is disability scholars are not talking about Palestine, and at the same time, persons with disabilities are not often, they're often absent from discussions on liberation, on occupation, and as a result, they're marginalized further by the other scholars. And this is what we were hoping today, is to bring these two conversations and to think of like what kind of a scholarship we need, but also what's the role of the disability community and activists and researchers and organizations, what responsibility they have in hopefully a post-war period. So we can, if you have any questions, please send your questions on the Q&A, and we will address them to the participants. So far, we don't have any questions. If I may, maybe Dina, also feel free to come in. But Dina and I think Rita is also with us. Jakiman, and many of us have been working in this field for some time. And maybe I can ask you, Jasper, and Dina, and Aitab, and Suzanne, what do you think as researchers and scholars in this field, what do you think are the priorities for researchers, and what issues we need to address as scholars regarding persons with disabilities and what is happening in Palestine?
I mean, I can start off not so much in terms of saying what those issues are, but more saying, you know, where those ideas should come from. And I think, you know, as has already been mentioned, much of the scholarship comes from the global north. You know, increasingly, both research funders and researchers themselves are understanding more the importance of equitable and collaborative partnerships in inclusive knowledge production. So I would say we need to be led by scholars first and foremost in the region who know the issues, and also not to be siloed, as this is just an issue for those who are experts in disability. Because as already has been said, you know, it can be quite an apolitical space. And I mean, there are different approaches to studying disability. And as we've seen when we did our scoping work for Disability Under Siege, much of the research, academic research in the region, is either done in medical faculties, or it may be done in education in terms of kind of remedial interventions. And we don't see disability studies in the social sciences or humanities space at all in curricular research in the region. The more dynamic work is happening outside of academic institutions and partners between academics and activists and, you know, more alternative forms of knowledge production. Whereas in the West, I think there's also, it's political in the sense that it's framed as a human right and it's a social model, but it's not political in the terms of understanding the geopolitics around disability.
Thank you, Dina. Anyone, Jasper?
Rita is one.
Sorry?
Rita is raising your hand.
Oh, okay. Could we bring Rita in? I can't see Rita.
Rita, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. I don't think I can see Rita.
Yeah. She needs to unmute herself.
Her hand is up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Rita.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to compliment what Dina was saying about a lot of work, research work being done in the North about the South. We should do our own research. But having said that, for disability, I honestly think that it is crucial now to try to bridge the gap between activism and research, and work very hard to get people with disabilities to be able to do both, because they are two very different skills. But people with disability also need very good research skills. They need to do their own research, and they need to be able to write reports that can appeal to governments, I mean, in as much as possible, also international aid, and also to document experiences. And this doesn't happen quite the same way like with advocacy. And that's, I think, this is the next 5-year project as far as we're concerned at Institute, working with Shada and people like Shada, who are both activists and researchers in developing skills and exposing the story of people with disability here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. And it was interesting, and to follow up on Dina, when we did the literature review on what has been produced in Lebanon, for instance, on disability, but also how faculties completely, like the faculties of sociology or education, refrained from engaging with disability beyond in education. It's about special education. In sociology, it's absent. It's still not seen as a popular theme. Jasper, and then we will take a series of questions. Over to you, Jasper.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of appreciate what Dina had said about how disability is political in the human rights sense, say in the Western context or the global North context, but not political in the geopolitical sense. And this goes back to Maha, what you're saying about disability scholars not talking about Palestine, which remains the general case in North America, that I can at least speak to that context. And so, and I think, you know, even in this the context of this genocide, there's been a real scramble in North American universities for critical disability studies scholars to address Palestine meaningfully, if it's addressed at all. And by meaningfully, I mean not as a kind of counter narrative of radical alterity as something happening elsewhere, but actually something that is connected to, you know, kind of transnational circuits of the production of disability across the globe, and kind of related through military infrastructures, related to deteriorating health infrastructures around the globe, et cetera, et cetera. So not to be producing Palestine as a space of extraordinary exception, but as a place of connectivity. So I think in a lot of North American curricula, you still see a global North, global South division happening, and the kind of consolidation of the global South through places like Palestine. And there's still a massive resistance in disability rights organizing, much of which has been entirely silent in North America about the genocide in Gaza, you know, ongoingly. So that's and literally the kind of decision to say this does not speak to our work, or this has nothing to do with disability rights. Palestine has nothing to do with disability rights. So there's a way in which the, I would say the understanding of Palestinians with disabilities and their lives, and at the same time understanding the production and the manufacturing of disability, have to kind of constantly be brought together as processes. The amputation, the quote unquote amputation crisis in Gaza is a manufactured crisis, right? We can never lose sight of who is the agent in this manufacturing, which is settler colonialism and Israeli state violence. So I think these are some of the issues. Even when that literature from Palestine is incorporated, it is often incorporated as a way of filling in curriculum, as opposed to a real understanding of what it means to address impairment and what it means to address mass impairment. I think we don't have the capacity for that in much of critical disability studies in North America. I think those things are changing, but they're changing quite slowly.
Thank you, Jasper. There are a number of questions. I'm going to try to take some. Okay. So in terms of this event is recorded, and the recording will be available on the website. We can send you an email about this. I think it will be available on both the Disability Under Siege and the Lebanese Studies website. Are there disabled researchers in Palestine, and at which universities could I contact them? I think probably it might be best maybe to reach up to Suzanne and Shaza and Rita. I think they can also direct you. Okay, I think a question to Jasper and others. Can you talk specifically about what you think is useful and applicable about prevailing theories and models offered by disability studies in the Euro-American academia, and what is not useful or applicable to the situation in Palestine?
Waiting for Rita.
I think Keith Rosenthal's put this in here. I'll just lead this off. What do I think is useful and applicable about prevailing theories and models offered? See, I think this is part of the problem, is that the direction always starts from Euro-American academia. And so I would just ask even that we need to kind of reverse the trajectory of what it is that is telling us, what is disability in Palestine? How is it lived? How is it understood? And not so much always understanding Euro-American academia to be either helpful or not helpful. So in some sense, I'm just even questioning the question, how it's framed, right? And I include my own work in this. I am somebody that's been trying to respond to Euro-American disability studies. I have stopped trying to do that because I think it keeps us caught in the kind of center periphery model, where we're trying to adjust the center in relation to knowledges coming from the periphery, as opposed to honoring the knowledges coming from the periphery onto itself. So I think what we need to do is stop asking what is useful or not useful about Euro-American work, and actually start learning from the work that is coming from the region, and prioritizing and centering that work.
Okay, thank you, Jasper. I'm going to try to see if there are any other questions. I mean, the contacts of the speakers are all online, so if you visit the website, you'll find all of them. Okay, I think. So there's a question from Pamela. I see use of internet when available for remote typical education. Can we use this modality for remote occupied territories? And online teaching, I mean, also to include Palestinian disability activists in the scholarship abroad. I want to see many more events like this. I don't know if maybe you can give us an idea about, you've also worked on Lebanon post Beirut blast, and you've assessed how usually responses often overlook persons with disabilities, but also how emergency responses are often not inclusive. Maybe you can tell us about some of the...
Yeah, it's quite similar basically. So we noticed that in Lebanon there was no plan at all, no emergency plan. However, there is one council. Sorry, I don't know who's not muted. But I believe that regardless what plan you will put, what happened in Gaza, this war is beyond any imagination. The massive killing and the genocide that's happening, it's preventing the way how you can accommodate all of these atrocities and how you can support people with disabilities in that way. Everything, I mean, even people, when they move to the tent, they are attacked. So if now we're talking about, I was thinking how we can make a shelter inclusive, and I was suggesting what we can do for the toilets, having portable toilets, all of that. Yet everything, even if you will have something like a movable toilet, it can be attacked as well. So nothing is safe at the moment, but definitely we should provide certain features of accessibility to ensure that people, they can have their needs anticipated for. But what we should do after that is that there should be a collaboration of all of the experts in the field from different disciplines to ensure that all of the needs of people are catered for, not only on the architectural perspective only, but also teaching and learning. We know that the schools have been completely demolished. How we can make the curriculum inclusive and accessible to everyone, how we can make teaching and learning accessible to everyone. This is another issue. So yeah, there is a lot of things to talk about, but definitely there should be a plan. And I think until the war stops, we should think collaboratively how we can achieve that. We've provided guidelines in Lebanon about schools, how schools can be reconstructed inclusively and how heritage building can be reconstructed inclusively. And I think this can be how hospitals can be designed inclusively. This is another thing. So all of the infrastructure has to be designed in a way, and there should be guidelines to ensure that the whole reconstruction of myself.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time. There are so many topics. I feel like we just barely scratched the surface. I think we just provided a spotlight on this topic. I mean, there are so many issues like gender and disabilities, another layer that we did not explore. These women versus men and how their lives will be impacted versus, all sectors of the different, facets of how disability will impact the lives and how the society will treat and respond to these different groups is going, it's something that requires a lot of work. So I hope that today we just started the conversation. I hope our colleagues who are in the field of disability will, as one of them said, we have our research, it's ongoing, we can't stop. Sometimes we can't continue business as usual, and we need to respond to the pressing needs, and we need to engage. And I hope that there will be more scholars in the field of disability who will focus on what's happening in Palestine. And I also hope our colleagues in the other disciplines will adopt disability as one of the intersectionalities in their work, rather than continue to overlook it. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Just add one note regarding the video that we've seen about Shireen. So the video, sorry for the technical issues, but the video will be posted later on our YouTube channel. We will have international sign language interpretation, one version, and we will have the Arabic sign language interpretation for the same video. So we'll have two versions, so it can be accessible for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, very much for being with us. And and hope we will continue this conversation and we will be able to narrow it on certain topics next time. And yes, thank you everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.